Ariana, these are what I have come to call my rapid fire questions. The truth is they don't tend to be rapid fire and the answers don't tend to be quick, but somehow they have taken on that title nonetheless. Are you ready to begin?
I'm ready. I feel like I'm on a game show.
That's kind of the vibe I'm going for.
Okay.
Okay. When did you first know you wanted to be a lawyer?
13.
You got to give us more. or it's really going to be rapid fire.
Okay. So I was 13 years old. I grew up in a family where we actually had dinner around the dining room, formal dining room table pretty regularly. And my father was known to encourage debate at the table. I'm one of 3 children, and just high expectations of how you presented yourself at the table and what you were going to talk about. And oftentimes it was rapid fire at the table. So that was probably the beginning. And then also when I was 15, my parents took us to Haiti on a trip. And at that time, things were very, very dire there. And I had an opportunity to really see poverty firsthand. And although I had no sense of whether I would go into legal services practice or something like that, I just knew that I wanted to make a difference. And I wanted to not only be able to apply the law, but I wanted to understand the law and why is the law what it is, and became fascinated by the fact that the law evolves over time if you are a good practitioner. So that was what really attracted me to it. And once I opened my mouth and said I wanted to be a lawyer, I think my future was sort of destined to be that way because there was a lot of encouragement along the way within the family.
Well, that makes sense. Do you have a favorite attorney to litigate against?
Oh, that is really a difficult question. I don't know that I have a favorite attorney. I've been so blessed to have adversaries of mine with whom I've created a rapport. They are zealous litigators. They really are just so tough. But at the same time, they are generous in spirit, responsible and accountable. Their word really is their bond. I think of some people, I think of somebody like David Eichel, who was at Simpson Thacher, really, really tough. But I always knew that when we had a conversation, that conversation was going to hold the same water later down the road. Greg Markell is a phenomenal litigator. One of my greatest references for my career was Vince de Blasi, who recently passed away. And Vince was somebody who he would always bring a lot of energy into the courtroom. He was a phenomenal trial lawyer and tenacious, but it was actually as challenging as it was to litigate against Vince and his team, including Penny Shane, who's also a wonderful lawyer from Sullivan and Cromwell. We always felt like we were there to do our best, but in an honest way. So those are the names that first come to mind for me, and I'm probably forgetting good friends, so I apologize.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. So what would you identify as sort of the biggest change to the class action landscape over the previous 5 years?
Oh, that's a really open question. So many things have happened in the class action landscape. I mean, I started out as a securities fraud practitioner, and those cases, the ability to bring those cases in terms of the breadth of the class and the extent to which you can include certain investors depending on where they reside. Also,
talking about Morrison?
Yes, I am talking about Morrison, and also thinking about what the thresholds are that you need to meet, class certification, the standard, really, having to engage in this rigorous analysis, and what is it that you need to do. Here, we had morphed away from a concept of bifurcated discovery,
sure,
only to then have the rules governing what you need to show for class certification be so much higher. And so inevitably, you really do have to make sure that you've gotten the necessary information for class certification while simultaneously doing merits discovery. And I never want to split those two. In fact, my argument is we're basically in full-blown merits discovery right from the outset, because I basically have to demonstrate certain aspects of the merits, even though you're not really supposed to have to, on class cert.
What's your favorite movie?
Oh, My Cousin Vinny. That's easy.
So I was going to ask you next what your favorite legal movie is, but technically that ticks both boxes.
It does. It does.
Is there a particular book that you've gifted throughout your career, the book that you like to give to friends, associates, partners, anything like that?
There's not one in particular that comes to mind, with one exception, and I can't believe I'm blanking on the name of it. It's a book that's written by the Hansons. It's a co-team of writers, and it's one of these sort of management or self-management books that helps you to discern how to best manage a team. And in fact, I know it's called Who Will Do What by When. And I have applied that. Every person on my team a number of years ago, it was required reading.
Okay.
And
that qualifies.
Yes, and the reason for that was that I wanted everybody to know that as much as I expect from them, they should expect as much from me. If I say I'm going to do something, I expect them to hold me accountable just as I would hold them accountable.
Oh, that's good. What was your least favorite law school class?
Oh, my least favorite law school class was probably property. I don't know what it was about that class, and it was Professor Kanan from Fordham University, whom I have a good relationship with now. But that class just was so difficult for me to get my head around it.
Right.
And I really would prefer not to think about some of the standards that you needed to know for the bar.
Right.
I managed to obviously pass, but
Really, I love the rule against perpetuities. I don't know.
I'm sure. Okay, good for you. There needs to be people who do. So,
No, I am being quite facetious. It was my least favorite law school class too. Well, that and tax. So
I didn't take tax.
that was a good call.
Yes.
What is, in your opinion, the largest growth area in class action law now?
Oh my goodness. I don't know that I have an answer for that. Right now, I feel as if the class action device is under such great challenge. And so, consumer cases are harder and harder to bring with each passing day. Securities fraud cases, the interesting thing about those types of cases is there is always going to be greed. There's always going to be greed. And I, having done securities fraud cases since the very beginning of my practice in 1992, I really do believe that area is cyclical. And so I actually expect that there will be another cycle, just as there have been multiple in the course of my career. And I really enjoy those cases, getting into learning how a company's working within and the background of the representations that they're making and how that affects the stock price. I find all of that to be really interesting. So I'd love to get back there. A specific growth area, I don't know. I don't know. I'd have to really give some thought to that.
That's fair. Which of the following cases was worse for the plaintiff's bar? Carrera, Concepcion, Dukes, Spokio.
Oh, can I just choose all of the above?
D, all of the above. But you have to see some rear their head more in your practice than others, or at least believe that they rear their heads more in the collective practice of plaintiffs than others, no?
Yes, although it depends on which area of law you're currently practicing in, and I try to be very flexible, morphing between the various types of cases, whether they're securities fraud cases or consumer cases, data breach cases. Concepcion and arbitration clauses, this is a big problem. And the fact that individuals' rights are being so limited, oftentimes when they don't even know that they're being so limited, has been extremely troubling. And we've seen it really fully manifest itself when you have a situation where there might not have been an arbitration clause and suddenly it's in a click and wrap, right? So we really have been challenged by those clauses. But then again, it really depends on which court you're in, because we've seen different courts find some of those clauses to be unconscionable. And, then again, you've got a Supreme Court ruling that is telling you what's appropriate and what's fair. And so, I still think there's going to be some movement there. We're seeing some movement there in the context of certain areas of practice and even employment practices and the like. So I don't think I could say any one of them specifically alone or exclusively wins the top spot. I think you really have to consider which area you're practicing in.
No, that's a fair answer. Is there a particular legal nonprofit that's near and dear to your heart?
Yes. So Mobilization for Justice serves the needs of New Yorkers. Just recently changed its name to Mobilization for Justice. Prior to that, it was MFY Legal Services. And I was approached, oddly enough, by 3 adversaries of mine in the IPO securities litigation, all men who worked for these big white shoe firms, and they came to me and said, we sit on the board for this MFY Legal Services, and we just really think you would be a great contributor to this board. Would you consider learning more about us? And that was now 15 years ago. Shortly after I joined, they asked me to chair their fundraising event, which was quite an exercise and learning, because that's not something I had done.
Right.
And then after I ran that event, where it's a theater event, and it turns out that the show that we picked was Wicked, when it had just come to the Broadway. So that was really exciting. And after that, they asked me to serve as chair, which I did. Learned quite a bit because in New York, the legal services organizations, the staff, including the lawyers, are unionized. So there's collective bargaining. You're learning a lot of other aspects of the law that you might not otherwise be exposed to. And that can be challenging, but on the other hand, I have to say, the lawyers who work for Mobilization for Justice are so phenomenally talented and smart and work tirelessly, and they're not working for big money for themselves. They really are working for their clients. And I've had the privilege of actually encountering some of these lawyers at some of the conferences and conventions that we go to, where they're receiving awards and honors for the work that they've done in a class action that they brought, or even an individual action. I absolutely love being involved in this organization. The people are amazingly generous and talented, and the executive director, Jeanette Zelhoff, is just a phenom. She's a Wonder Woman.
Would you advise the next generation, your children, for instance, to go to law school?
I don't know if I would advise my children to go to law school. If they ask me, do I think it's a good idea for either one of them to pursue law, I would drill down with them to identify what is it that's calling them to the law. I believe that both of my children, who are extremely articulate and excellent writers, and they are both very, they like to debate. They often like to debate against one another. They can be very, very persuasive. I think they have somewhat of a cynical view of the law, in part because of the world that we're living in right now, in part because they've spent the last 21 and 18 years, respectively, with a mom who has been practicing law, and that has come with its own challenges, including socially. I missed a good part of their youth because I was busy practicing law and traveling and the like. So I would really want to spend time exploring with them what is calling them. I certainly could see one of them potentially doing work on the Hill, right, maybe lobbying, et cetera. And my other son, he is a dramatic arts student, expected to, as I said, start college in the fall, and he could be a phenomenal trial lawyer, just really phenomenal. He walks into a room and just kind of has that presence. Sometimes we have to get him focused. But I think that's one of the things that's really enamoring about him and why a jury would be interested in hearing from him, and I think could easily be persuaded.
Okay, last question.
Uh-oh.
If you had one piece of sort of poignant advice to impart on a young lawyer, what would that advice be?
Especially because you've raised the question as to advice for a young lawyer, I think the most important thing right now is being honest and accountable. We are seeing a lot of younger lawyers come in, and they're often distracted and often not be at their own fault. But when you think about how we started, in our professional lives, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have social media, we didn't have, multiple screens going at all times. And what I have found is that many young people often are easily distracted, and a number of them have excuses that in our day when we started would not have been acceptable. And I say this to my children, so if I give the advice to my children, I'm happy to impart it to others. You need to show up. That comes from my executive coach. How are you going to show up? You need to show up not only intent on doing the job, but prepared to do the job and expecting of yourself no less than completing the job as asked.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ariana.
Thank you.